What happens when a billionaire's love story becomes a public spectacle of betrayal? For Seraphina Blackwood, her life was a fairy tale. Married to the magnetic and powerful Damien Blackwood, she had it all, a sprawling penthouse overlooking the city, a love that tabloids swooned over, and now a baby on the way. But one cold evening the fairy tale shattered. Damien, in a chilling whisper that froze her soul, refused to claim their child. He accused her of the ultimate betrayal. Now, at the most prestigious event of the year, the Bulgari-sponsored Starlight Charity Gala, the truth will be exposed. A single DNA test live on stage holds the power to destroy lives, unravel dynasties, and reveal a secret so shocking no one will ever be the same. Stay with us as we uncover what really happened. The love story of Damien Blackwood and Seraphina Valerius was the kind of modern myth that gossip columnists and hopeless romantics feast on. He was the heir to the Blackwood Empire, a sprawling conglomerate of technology, real estate, and private equity, a man whose tailored suits cost more than most cars, and whose presence commanded silence in any room he entered. Damien wasn't just wealthy, he was power personified. His features were sharp, intelligent, a predator's handsome mask that concealed a relentless drive. Seraphina, by contrast, was the art curator, with a spirit as vibrant as the canvases she appraised. She came from a world of academia and quiet passion, not boardrooms and hostile takeovers. They met at a Sotheby's auction, where Damien was bidding on a Rothko not for its investment potential, but because, as he told her later, the turbulent reds and somber purples reminded him of his own soul. Seraphina had laughed a sound like wind chimes and challenged his self-assessment. He was captivated. Their courtship was a whirlwind of private jets to Paris for dinner, shutting down museums for private viewings, and stolen moments in the quiet gardens of his family's Long Island estate. Damien, a man notoriously private and emotionally guarded, seemed to unfurl in her presence. He traded his cynical smirk for a genuine smile. He listened. For the first time, the world saw Damien Blackwood not as a corporate shark, but as a man deeply in love. Their wedding was the event of the decade. Seraphina, in a custom Vera Wang gown, looked ethereal. Damien, watching her walk down the aisle, had a tear trace a path down his chiseled cheek, a moment captured by Vogue that went viral, cementing their status as the world's most enviable couple. The first year of their marriage was idyllic. They lived in a penthouse that felt less like a home and more like a private cloud, with panoramic windows showcasing the city skyline as their personal art installation. Seraphina softened Damien's steel edges, and he gave her a world of security and boundless opportunity she'd never dreamed of. The news of her pregnancy was the final perfect piece of their fairy tale. Damien was ecstatic. He held her in his arms, his face buried in her hair, whispering promises to their unborn child. He would build them a legacy, a world worthy of a Blackwood heir. The nursery was designed by a world-renowned architect, a miniature palace of soft creams and gentle blues. He commissioned a lullaby from a famous composer. He was, by all accounts, the perfect expectant father. The first crack in their perfect world was almost imperceptible. It started with the arrival of Isabella Blackwood, Damien's stepmother. A woman sculpted from ice and ambition, Isabella had married Damien's father, Sterling Blackwood, late in his life. She had a son of her own from a previous marriage, Julian. A smarmy, handsome man who always lingered in Damien's shadow. his eyes glinting with a covetous envy. Sterling had left the entire empire to Damien, his biological son, leaving Isabella and Julian with a generous but finite trust fund, a fact that Isabella had never forgiven. Isabella began to visit the penthouse more frequently, her presence a cloying perfume that lingered long after she left. She'd bring Seraphina teas she claimed were for the baby's health and engage her in long, probing conversations, her questions veiled in a syrupy concern that set Seraphina's teeth on edge. "You must be so thrilled, dear," Isabella said one afternoon, her perfectly manicured fingers stroking a porcelain teacup. "To give Damien what he's always wanted, a true heir, a continuation of the Blackwood bloodline. It's everything." The emphasis on bloodline was subtle, yet sharp as a pinprick. The turning point came on a Tuesday evening. The air was thick with the promise of a summer storm. Damien came home late, his usual warm greeting replaced by a stiff, unsettling silence. He didn't kiss her. He walked to the vast window, his back to her, and loosened his tie. "Is everything all right, my love?" Seraphina asked, her hand instinctively going to her swollen belly. "I had a meeting with Isabella today," he said, his voice flat. "Oh, I hope she was pleasant." He turned, and the look on his face made the breath catch in her throat. The warmth was gone, replaced by a glacial fury she had only ever seen him direct at business rivals. "She showed me something, Seraphina. Something I can't unsee. Damien, what are you talking about? You're scaring me." He strode over to the marble coffee table and threw a slim silver laptop down. He tapped the trackpad, and an image filled the screen. It was a photo clearly taken with a long lens of Seraphina having lunch on an outdoor patio. She was laughing, her head tilted back. Sitting across from her was Leo Vance. Leo, her oldest and dearest friend. A struggling artist she'd known since they were scholarship kids at the same prestigious university. He was her anchor to her old life, a reminder of who she was before the Blackwood name. He was funny, kind, and utterly platonic. They met for lunch once a month to catch up a tradition Damien had always known about, and she thought accepted. "Lunch?" Seraphina said, her voice trembling with confusion. "Damien, this is from last month. I told you I was meeting Leo. Did you tell me he was holding your hand?" Damien's voice was a low growl. He pointed to the screen. The angle of the photo was deceptive. It looked like their hands were intertwined across the table, though in reality he had been passing her the salt shaker. "That's not Damien, you can't possibly believe. What am I supposed to believe?" He shot back, his voice rising. "I'm supposed to believe that my pregnant wife is having clandestine lunches with her starving artist ex-boyfriend." "He is not my ex-boyfriend," she cried, horrified. "He's my friend. You know that I know what I see, and I know what Isabella found." He opened another file. It was a string of text messages, supposedly between her phone and Leo's. They were flirtatious, intimate, and spoke of a shared secret. They were complete fabrications. "Those are fake," Seraphina gasped, reaching for the laptop. "I never wrote those, Damien. This is insane. This is Isabella. Can't you see she's trying to poison you against me?" "Is she?" He sneered, his handsome face twisted into a mask of ugly suspicion. "Or is she the only one looking out for the Blackwood family? The only one brave enough to show me the truth?" Tears streamed down Seraphina's face. "The truth is that I love you. The truth is that I am carrying your child." He laughed, a harsh, bitter sound that echoed in the cavernous room. "My child. You expect me to believe that? Now, after all of this." He advanced on her, his shadow swallowing her. He stopped just before her, his gaze dropping to her pregnant belly with a look of pure disgust. The words he spoke next were the ones that would shatter her universe. They were quiet, deliberate, and more violent than any physical blow. "I don't know whose child that is, Seraphina," he said, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "But until I do, you will not claim it as a Blackwood. As far as I'm concerned, this baby is not mine." The world tilted. The floor seemed to drop away from beneath her feet. The man she loved, the father of her child, had just disowned them both. The fairy tale was over. The nightmare had just begun. The days following Damien's accusation were a masterclass in psychological torment. The penthouse, once their sanctuary in the sky, transformed overnight into a gilded prison. The warm, smiling staff were replaced by a new crew, stoic and uncommunicative, their eyes sliding past Seraphina as if she were a ghost. They were Isabella's people. Seraphina was certain of it. Damien was a phantom. He moved into a separate wing of the penthouse, their paths crossing only by cold, calculated chance. When they did see each other, he looked right through her, his face an unreadable mask of stone. The silence was the worst part. It was a living, breathing entity, thick with unspoken accusations and suffocating doubt. Seraphina's attempts to reach him were met with a wall of ice. Her calls went to voicemail. Her texts remained unread. Her pleas to his personal assistant were politely but firmly rebuffed. "Mr. Blackwood is in meetings" became a constant, soul-crushing refrain. The isolation was absolute. Her keycard for the private elevator was deactivated, leaving her reliant on the service elevator, a humiliating journey shared with laundry carts and catering staff. Her credit cards tied to the Blackwood family account were declined. First at a local bookstore, then at a pharmacy when she tried to buy prenatal vitamins. The public shame was a hot flush on her cheeks. She was being systematically erased, stripped of her identity and autonomy, carrying the air Damien now refused to acknowledge. Her only lifeline was her younger sister, Chloe. Practical, fiery, and fiercely loyal Chloe was a paralegal who possessed a healthy skepticism of the ultra-rich that had only sharpened since Seraphina's marriage. "I never trusted them, Sarah," Chloe said, her voice crackling with fury over the phone, one of the few lines they hadn't cut. "Not Damien, and especially not that black widow Isabella. She's playing him like a fiddle, and he's too arrogant to see it." Chloe tried to visit, but was stopped at the lobby by Blackwood security. "Mrs. Blackwood is not accepting visitors at this time," the guard said, his face impassive. Seraphina watched from the window high above a prisoner in her own home as her sister argued vehemently before finally being forced to leave. Desperate, Seraphina tried to contact Leo to warn him to understand how this had happened. But his number was disconnected. His social media pages were gone. It was as if he had vanished from the face of the earth. She feared the worst, that Damien, with his immense power and resources, had done something to him. Meanwhile, Isabella and her son Julian grew bolder. They were frequent visitors to the penthouse, no longer for polite teas, but for strategy sessions with Damien in his study. Seraphina would catch snippets of their conversations, words like legal recourse, protecting the estate, and paternity clause. Once she saw Julian clap a hand on Damien's shoulder, a look of faux sympathy on his face. "Whatever you need, brother," he'd said, his eyes flicking towards Seraphina, down the hall with unconcealed triumph. "We're here to help you clean up this mess." The press, once their biggest cheerleaders, had turned into a pack of ravenous wolves. An anonymous source had leaked the story of a major rift in the Blackwood marriage, hinting at infidelity on Seraphina's part. Paparazzi were camped outside their building day and night. Headlines screamed from the tabloids. "Blackwood baby scandal and billionaire's betrayal is the heir an imposter." Her image was being meticulously destroyed, and she was powerless to stop it. The breaking point came a month before her due date. Damien summoned her to his study. It was the first time they had been in the same room for a substantive conversation in weeks. He sat behind his massive mahogany desk, a king on his throne. Isabella and Julian stood behind him like vultures waiting for the kill. Seraphina Damien began his voice, devoid of any emotion. "We need to discuss the situation." "You mean our child?" she said, her own voice steady, despite the frantic beating of her heart. She refused to let them see her break. "The child you are carrying," he corrected coldly. "Isabella has brought a solution to my attention, a way to resolve this unfortunate matter with discretion and finality." Isabella stepped forward, a smug, reptilian smile on her face. "It's quite simple, dear. A paternity test. Once the child is born, a sample will be taken. It will be processed at a lab of our choosing. If by some miracle the child is Damien's, he will do his duty. He will provide for it. If it is not, you will sign a non-disclosure agreement, relinquish any and all claims to the Blackwood name, and disappear." Quietly. The audacity of it took Seraphina's breath away. A lab of their choosing. The results would be whatever they paid for them to be. It was a checkmate. "You would rig it," Seraphina said, looking directly at Damien, pleading with her eyes for him to see reason. "You would let her steal our child's birthright. It's about protecting the family legacy from an outside threat," Damien stated, parroting a line that was surely fed to him by his stepmother. A fire ignited in Seraphina's soul. The fear and despair that had crippled her for weeks burned away, replaced by a white-hot, cleansing rage. They thought she was a fragile doll they could break and discard. They were wrong. She came from a line of strong women who had faced hardship without flinching. She would not be a victim in her own life story. She stood up straighter, her hand resting protectively on her belly. She had one card left to play. It was a wild, desperate gamble, but it was all she had. "All right," she said, her voice ringing with newfound confidence. The three of them looked at her, surprised by her sudden compliance. "I agree to the DNA test." Seraphina continued, her gaze unwavering. "But not on your terms. On mine." Damien raised a skeptical eyebrow. "And what are your terms? It won't be done in secret in some lab you control. It will be done in public, in front of everyone." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. "The annual Starlight Charity Gala is in 2 weeks. It's the biggest event of the year. The entire city will be there. The press, your business partners, your so-called friends. We'll do it there. On stage." Isabella gasped. Julian looked momentarily flustered. Even Damien seemed taken aback. "That's preposterous," Isabella hissed. "Washing our dirty laundry in public. It's the only way I can be sure the laundry isn't tampered with," Seraphina retorted, her eyes locked on Damien. a renowned independent medical professional, a certified lab with a direct, secure video feed. The results will be revealed live for the entire world to see. She took a step closer to the desk, leaning forward slightly. You are so certain of my betrayal, Damien. You're so convinced that this baby isn't yours. If that's true, then this is your ultimate vindication. You can expose me as a fraud in front of everyone and be seen as the wronged party. But if you're wrong, if you have dragged my name and the name of your own child through the mud for nothing, then the whole world will watch you fall. She added the final masterstroke. And what better stage than the gala your foundation hosts? This year, it's sponsored by Bulgari, isn't it? A brand synonymous with eternal promises. How fitting. A tense silence filled the study. Damien stared at her, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. Was it shock? Reluctant admiration? He was trapped. To refuse her proposal now would be an admission of doubt, a sign of weakness. His pride, the very core of his being, would not allow it. Isabella was whispering furiously in his ear, but he waved her away. He stood up, his towering frame casting a long shadow. He looked at Seraphina, the woman he once loved, now his adversary in a war of his own making. Fine, he said the word, clipped and sharp. You want a public spectacle? You'll get one. The gala, on stage, let the world watch. Seraphina nodded once, a silent declaration of war. She turned and walked out of the study, her head held high. The gamble had been accepted. The stage was set. At the Starlight Gala, in front of the city's elite, the truth would finally have its audience. The night of the Starlight Charity Gala arrived, with an electric tension that seemed to crackle in the city air. The venue was the grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel, a space transformed into a celestial wonderland. Thousands of twinkling fairy lights were draped from the ceiling, mimicking a starry night sky. The tables were adorned with cascades of white orchids and shimmering crystal. At the entrance, a massive, elegantly designed banner read, "The Blackwood Foundation Starlight Gala, in partnership with Bulgari." The Italian luxury brand's sponsorship was evident everywhere, from the exquisite serpenti necklace displayed in a glass case for auction to the subtle logos on the programs. This was the apex of the city's social calendar, a confluence of old money, new tech billionaires, politicians and celebrities. But tonight, the usual air of festive schmoozing was replaced by something more predatory. The guests weren't just here to donate and be seen. They were here for the drama. The whispers followed Damien Blackwood as he entered. He was a portrait of cold, controlled power in a classic black tuxedo. He moved through the crowd with his usual confidence, but a keen observer would notice the tightness around his jaw, the way his eyes scanned the room with a hunter's intensity. Isabella and Julian flanked him. Isabella looking positively radiant in a venom-green gown, her smile as sharp as glass. She absorbed the curious stares and hushed gossip like a plant absorbing sunlight. This was her moment of triumph, the culmination of her meticulous planning. Then Seraphina arrived. A collective, hushed intake of breath swept through the ballroom. She had chosen her armor with care. She wore a gown of the deepest midnight blue silk that draped over her 8-month pregnant form, not to hide it, but to celebrate it. The fabric shimmered under the chandeliers, making her look like the night sky itself. Around her neck was the only piece of jewelry. She wore a simple, delicate diamond pendant. A gift from Damien, from their first anniversary. A relic from a time when he'd looked at her with love, not suspicion. Her hair was swept up, Her face was elegantly made up, and her eyes held a calm, resolute fire. She was not a victim seeking pity. She was a queen, arriving to reclaim her throne. Her sister Chloe was by her side, a protective sentinel in a sleek black dress, her eyes daring anyone to cast a judgmental glance. As Seraphina walked through the room, the whispers grew louder. There she is. She has some nerve showing her face. She looks magnificent, but still, can you imagine the scandal I heard? The father is her artist friend. Damien threw him out of the country. Isabella Blackwood looks like the cat who got the cream. She's won. Seraphina ignored them all. Her focus was singular, aimed directly at the man standing near the stage. As her eyes met Damien's across the crowded room, the entire world seemed to fall away. For a fleeting second, she saw a flicker of the man she had married, a flash of pain, of conflict, of regret. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by the now familiar mask of cold indifference. He gave her a stiff, barely perceptible nod, the kind one gives to a business acquaintance, not the mother of their child. The cut was so deep, so final, it solidified her resolve. There was no going back. The early part of the evening was a surreal performance of civility. Speeches were made, donations were pledged, a fabulous dinner was served, but no one could truly focus on the food or the pleasantries. The main event was yet to come. The tension was a palpable, tightening coil. Finally, the moment arrived. Damien took to the stage, the spotlight following him. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, his voice smooth and commanding, amplified throughout the silent ballroom. Thank you for your generosity tonight. The Blackwood Foundation has always been about legacy, about building a better future. But legacy is also built on truth. And tonight we are going to face a very personal truth publicly. He sounded like a man in control. A man wronged but willing to seek clarity with dignity. Seraphina had to admit it was a masterful performance. As many of you have heard through whispers and speculation, there have been questions surrounding my family and the child my wife Seraphina is carrying. His use of my wife was a deliberate, sharp twist of the knife. We have mutually agreed to answer these questions once and for all. Tonight, right here. He gestured to the side of the stage. A woman in a crisp white lab coat, Dr. Aris Thorne, a renowned geneticist with an impeccable reputation, walked out, followed by 2 assistants wheeling a small high-tech medical cart. Dr. Thorne will be taking samples from myself and from Seraphina, Damien announced. These samples will be processed by a certified independent laboratory, with the results transmitted directly and securely to the screen behind me. There will be no interference, no speculation, just science, just the truth. A wave of shocked murmurs rippled through the audience. They had expected drama, but not this. This was a gladiatorial contest. It was brutal, unprecedented, and utterly captivating. Seraphina ascended the stage steps, her heart pounding a steady, determined rhythm. She took her place beside Damien, the space between them a chasm of betrayal. She could feel hundreds of pairs of eyes on her, dissecting her, judging her. She met their gazes without flinching. Dr. Thorne addressed the audience. The process is simple and transparent. We will be conducting a buccal swab from both Mr. Blackwood and Mrs. Blackwood. The DNA will be sequenced to create a profile. We will then compare Mr. Blackwood's profile to the fetal DNA present in Mrs. Blackwood's maternal blood sample, which was drawn earlier under supervised conditions. The test determines the probability of paternity. The results are definitive. The procedure was carried out with clinical efficiency. Thorne first swabbed the inside of Damien's cheek. Then she approached Seraphina. As the soft swab touched her mouth, Seraphina looked out at the sea of faces. She saw Isabella in the front row, her face alight with vicious anticipation. She saw Julian, a smirk playing on his lips, and she saw Damien standing like a statue, his face a grim, unreadable slate. "The samples are now being processed." The Thorn announced, her voice echoing in the pin-drop silence. "The secure upload will take approximately 15 minutes. We ask for your patience." 15 minutes, the final 15 minutes of her old life. Seraphina stood on that stage under the glare of the hot lights, feeling utterly alone, yet strangely powerful. She had placed her entire future and the future of her child on a single desperate gamble. The grand, opulent ballroom felt like a courtroom, and the entire world was the jury. The clock began to tick. The 15 minutes that followed felt like a rip in the fabric of time, a pocket of suspended animation where the entire world held its breath. On the brightly lit stage, the three central figures of the drama stood frozen in a silent tableau, the giant screen behind them displaying its serene loading bar was a merciless clock counting down to absolution or annihilation. Every second stretched into an eternity, thick with unspoken thoughts and simmering emotions. For Seraphina, it was a trial by fire. She stood a solitary island of defiant grace, her hands clasped over the gentle swell of her belly. She forced her breathing to remain even a meditative rhythm against the frantic pounding of her heart. This was the precipice. Below her lay two possible futures, one of public redemption and the reclamation of her honor, the other a bottomless abyss of shame and exile. Her mind, a whirlwind of fear and resolve, flashed with memories. She saw Damien, his face illuminated by moonlight on their honeymoon, whispering promises of forever. Then the image soured, shifting to his face contorted by cold fury in their penthouse, his voice a venomous whisper as he disowned their child. She steeled herself against the memory. He had made his choice. Now science would make hers. She sent a silent prayer, not to a god, but to the truth itself, hoping it was strong enough to burn through the web of lies that had ensnared her. Damien, by contrast, was a monolith of self-assured fury. He stood with his arms crossed, his posture radiating an impatient, righteous anger. In his mind, this spectacle was a necessary, if distasteful, final act. He was already composing the speech he would give when the inevitable result confirmed his suspicions. He would be magnanimous in his victory, of course. He would speak of the sanctity of the Blackwood name, the pain of betrayal, and the unfortunate necessity of this public airing. He would cast Seraphina out, not with overt cruelty, but with the cold, surgical pity of a man deeply wronged. He glanced at her, standing there in her midnight blue gown, and felt a pang of something he refused to name. Was it regret? No, it was disappointment. Disappointment that the beautiful vessel he had chosen for his legacy had proven to be so flawed. He hardened his heart against it. The truth would soon set him free. And in the front row, Isabella Blackwood was basking in the glow of imminent triumph. She radiated a predatory stillness, her eyes fixed on the stage, her smile a thin, cruel slash of red lipstick. She could already taste the victory. The lab she had suggested to Damien was one where her influence ran deep. While she hadn't needed to rig this test, convinced as she was of Seraphina's guilt, she had ensured that if any anomalies occurred, the result would default to their desired outcome. She imagined the aftermath, Seraphina disgraced and banished. Damien heartbroken and vulnerable, leaning on his loving stepmother for support. And then the slow, patient process of elevating her own son, Julian, to a position of power within the empire, securing her own future indefinitely. It was all unfolding exactly as she had designed. Finally, a soft electronic chime echoed through the ballroom, sharp and sudden as a cracking whip. The loading bar on the screen vanished, replaced by the official letterhead of the genetics laboratory. Dr. Aris Thorne. Her face impassive, stepped toward the microphone. "The results are complete," she announced, her voice cutting through the thick silence. "The laboratory has successfully sequenced the DNA profiles and performed the paternity comparison analysis." The document on the screen scrolled down, revealing complex charts of genetic markers. And then it stopped. At the very bottom, in letters large enough for even those in the back rows to see, the conclusion appeared. Subject Damien Blackwood. Alleged father comparison to fetal DNA. Probability of paternity, 99.999%. A single word blazed beneath the percentage stark and unequivocal match. The sound that swept through the room was not a simple gasp. It was a physical shockwave of sound, a collective vocal shudder of disbelief. The narrative that had been so carefully crafted, so widely accepted, had just been detonated. For Seraphina, the wave of relief was so powerful it was nearly incapacitating. The tension that had held her spine rigid for months dissolved in an instant, and she felt a dizzying lightness as if she might float away. The tears that sprang to her eyes were hot and cleansing, washing away the stain of the accusations, the humiliation of the isolation. She brought a trembling hand to her mouth, a sob of pure, unadulterated vindication escaping her lips. It was true. She had never betrayed him. Her son was his son. Damien stared at the screen, his mind refusing to process what his eyes were seeing. 19. Match. The words were meaningless, an error, a glitch in the system. It was impossible. He had seen the photos. He had read the texts. He had been so certain his conviction, a bedrock upon which he had built his righteous anger. But the bedrock was now sand crumbling beneath his feet. He looked from the glaring screen to Seraphina's tear-streaked face, not tears of guilt, but of triumph, and the first crack appeared in his fortress of arrogance. A horrifying, sickening thought wormed its way into his mind. What if I was wrong? But the most potent reaction was Isabella's. Her perfectly painted smile didn't just falter. It shattered. Her face, moments before, alight with predatory glee, contorted into a brief, uncontrolled mask of incandescent rage. Her eyes, wide with shock, flashed with a venomous disbelief. Impossible. How could this be her entire plan? Her meticulously built house of cards had just been blown apart by a single, irrefutable fact. She saw her future of influence and power vanishing in the glare of that screen. The ballroom erupted into a frenzy. Reporters were shouting their camera flashes, strobing like lightning in a hurricane. This was the story of the decade. The billionaire had been wrong. The wronged wife was vindicated. Seraphina took a deep, steadying breath, preparing to step forward and speak, to finally reclaim her voice. But a new voice, calm and laced with an undeniable authority, sliced through the pandemonium. "Please, a moment." The crowd quieted, turning to see Marcus Vance, the silver-haired, semi-retired patriarch of the Blackwood legal dynasty, striding purposefully toward the stage. His presence commanded immediate respect. He had been Sterling Blackwood's most trusted advisor, a man of unimpeachable integrity. Damien stared at him bewildered. "Marcus, what is the meaning of this intrusion?" Marcus ignored him, his gaze fixed upon Dr. Thorne. He held up a thick, cream-colored envelope sealed with the dark blue wax of his old law firm. "Dr. Thorne, my apologies for the interruption. However, I am legally bound to act. This envelope contains a sworn directive from my late client, Sterling Blackwood. His instructions were explicit. It was to be opened only in the event that Damien Blackwood publicly and formally questioned the paternity of his own heir. That condition, as we have all just witnessed, has been met." A new, more profound wave of confusion silenced the room. A directive from the grave. "What are you talking about?" Damien demanded, his voice strained. Isabella was on her feet, her face a mask of panic. "Marcus, stop this at once. This is a private family matter. You have no right." The shrillness of her tone was a confession in itself. "On the contrary, Isabella." Marcus countered, his voice like ice. Sterling feared this day might come. He worried that Damien's pride, a trait he felt was inherited from his mother, could lead him to make a catastrophic error in judgment. Sterling's directive is clear. Should that happen, the full truth of the Blackwood legacy must be made public. "Dr. Thorne, you are instructed to run a second comparison." A comparison between whom, the geneticist asked her. Professional curiosity piqued. Marcus Vance's reply dropped like a stone into the silent room. "You have Damien Blackwood's genetic profile. The archives of this firm hold a secure, court-verified sample of Sterling Blackwood's DNA. The directive instructs you to compare father and son." The foundation of the entire evening shifted. This was no longer about a marital dispute. It was about the very identity of the man who led the Blackwood Empire. "This is insane," Damien roared, a desperate edge to his voice. "I am my father's son." "This is a pathetic theatrical game, but Dr. Thorne, bound by the legal document, was already at her console, her fingers flying across the screen. A new comparison chart loaded. This time there was no 15-minute wait. The profiles were already in the system. The progress bar filled in seconds. Damien watched, his face ashen, the horrifying realization of a deeper trap finally dawning on him. This wasn't Seraphina's doing. This was a ghost from his father's past, reaching out to expose a secret he never knew existed. The screen refreshed. The result flashed stark and brutal. Paternity comparison. Damien Blackwood and Sterling. Blackwood deceased. Probability of paternity %. The word beneath it was a death sentence to his identity. No match. If the first result had caused a shockwave, this one was an apocalypse. The ballroom didn't just erupt, it detonated. The sound was a visceral roar of astonishment and scandal. Damien Blackwood was not a Blackwood. The heir was an imposter. Damien physically recoiled, as if he'd been struck by lightning. The world dissolved into a meaningless swirl of light and sound. His name, his father, his legacy, all of it vaporized. He looked at Isabella, whose face was now a landscape of pure terror, and he finally understood her frantic need to control the succession. She had always known. But Marcus Vance, the executor of Sterling's final will, was not finished. The final devastating act was yet to come. Sterling Blackwood knew he was not Damien's biological father. Marcus announced, his voice resonating with grim authority over the chaos. He chose to raise the boy as his own, out of a sense of duty. but he was a man who believed above all else in bloodline. He spent years searching for the family he thought he'd lost. Marcus paused, letting his words hang in the air. He had a son, a biological son from a brief relationship long before he met Damien's mother. A child he located and supported from afar, honoring the mother's wish for a life of anonymity. Marcus turned his gaze from the stage to the wings, to a shadowed corner where a figure stood paralyzed with confusion. The spotlight operator, sensing the climax, swung the beam of light, illuminating the stunned face of Leo Vance. Sterling Blackwood's true heir. Marcus declared, his voice booming like a judge's gavel. The sole biological inheritor of the Blackwood name and fortune is the very man Damien Blackwood has spent the last few months trying to discredit and destroy. The revelation was a masterpiece of cosmic irony. Leo, the penniless artist, the accused adulterer, the man Damien saw as a worthless insect, was the true king. He stared out from the wings, his face a canvas of utter bewilderment, as hundreds of phones and cameras turned to him. On stage, the last vestiges of Damien's composure disintegrated. The sound that tore from his throat was primal, a howl of a man who had not just lost everything, but had discovered he never had it in the first place. He was a phantom who had been haunting his own life. His legs gave out, and he collapsed onto the stage, a great titan reduced to a heap of broken pride. In the front row, the final shock was too much for Isabella. Her eyes rolled back in her head, and she fainted, slumping gracelessly in her chair. The gala had become a ruin, and standing in the center of the wreckage, her hand still resting on her child, the one true Blackwood heir present on that stage, was Seraphina. She had come seeking justice and had inadvertently inherited a kingdom, a silent, vindicated queen, reigning over the ashes of an empire of lies. The Starlight Gala did not end. It fractured. The moment the words "no match" burned onto the giant screen, the carefully constructed facade of high society shattered into a million pieces. The air, once thick with suspense, was now choked with the cacophony of pure pandemonium. It was a roar of collective disbelief, a tidal wave of scandal that washed over the grand ballroom, drowning civility in its wake. Guests who had been sitting in stunned silence were now on their feet, their faces a mixture of horror, morbid glee, and frantic excitement. Phones were held aloft, not just taking pictures, but live streaming the complete and utter demolition of a dynasty. On stage, Damien Blackwood was at the epicenter of his own personal earthquake. The revelation that his son was, in fact, his own had been a shock that rattled his foundations. But this second truth, that his entire life was a lie, was a cataclysm that leveled him completely. He didn't just hear Marcus Vance's words. He felt them as a physical blow stealing the air from his lungs and the strength from his bones. He stumbled backward, his hand clutching at his chest, not from a heart attack, but as if trying to hold his very identity inside his body. His gaze, wit and disbelieving, darted from the damning words on the screen to the ashen, panicked face of Isabella. In her terror, he saw the confirmation. He saw decades of deceit. The name that had been his shield, his sword and his crown was nothing more than a costume he'd been forced to wear. The guttural, wounded sound that escaped his lips was the cry of a king being stripped of his robes, his title, and his very soul before a jeering crowd. As he crumpled to his knees, the relentless barrage of camera flashes was like a volley of gunfire, each spark a bullet piercing his shattered pride. The social death of Isabella and Julian was swift and brutal. Isabella's faint was no theatrical swoon. She had crumpled like a puppet whose strings had been cut. Julian, his face a mask of disbelief and rage, tried to rush to her side, shouting, "This is a lie! A conspiracy!" But no one was listening. The very people who had fawned over them minutes before now stared with cold contempt. They were no longer connected to the seat of power. They were obstacles, embarrassing footnotes to the main event. As security guards, grim-faced and efficient, moved to clear the stage, they were swept aside with the rest of the debris, their desperate protests lost in the din. While chaos reigned in the ballroom, an eerie calm settled over the backstage green room. It became a sanctuary, a pocket of stillness in the heart of the storm. Seraphina, guided by Chloe, sank into a plush velvet armchair, the adrenaline that had been her armor for weeks finally dissolving, leaving her trembling with exhaustion and overwhelming relief. Chloe wrapped a thick blanket around her, a simple grounding gesture of sisterly protection. Marcus Vance entered, his face somber but resolute, followed by a pale and shell-shocked Leo. The artist looked as though he had been plucked from his life and dropped into a surreal, incomprehensible dream. He stared at Seraphina, his oldest friend, the woman he had just seen publicly vindicated in the most dramatic way imaginable. "Sarah." Leo's voice was a ragged whisper. He ran a hand through his already messy hair. "Sterling Blackwood. My father. It doesn't make any sense. My mother. She adored my father. She told me he was a kind man, a poet who died in an accident. She never spoke of wealth or power." Marcus Vance offered a sad, knowing smile. "Your mother Eleanor was the one true love of Sterling's life. He met her long before his other marriages, but she was fiercely independent. She refused to be part of his world, a world she saw as corrupt and suffocating. When she found out she was pregnant, she left wanting to raise you far from the Blackwood name. Sterling respected her wishes, but he never stopped loving her, and he never stopped watching over you from a distance. The trust fund was his way of ensuring his son, the son of the woman he truly loved, could live his life on his own terms." The weight of this history settled in the room. It was a story of lost love, of secrets, held for decades, all of it crashing into the present moment. For Seraphina, it was a dizzying realization. The man Damien had painted as a worthless parasite was in fact the product of a love purer than any the Blackwood dynasty had known since. The days that followed were a whirlwind of legal maneuvering and media saturation. The Blackwood revelation dominated every news cycle. Damien spirited away to a secluded estate in the Catskills, owned by his biological mother's family, became a ghost. The few paparazzi shots that emerged were of a gaunt, bearded man, a hollowed-out shell of the titan he once was. He was a prisoner in a fortress of his own, making haunted by a truth he could not escape. His punishment was not poverty, but irrelevance. He had to live every day knowing that the son he had refused to claim was the only true Blackwood between them. Seraphina acted with a clarity that surprised everyone but her sister. The morning after the gala, she met with a team of divorce lawyers. She didn't want revenge. She wanted a severance. She walked into the conference room, her pregnant form a symbol of the future, and laid out her terms, a clean break, a generous but finite settlement to secure her and her son's future, and a gag order preventing Damien from ever contesting the narrative again. Damien's lawyers, under immense pressure from a panicked Blackwood Enterprises board, desperate to contain the PR disaster, agreed without a fight. They knew a court battle would be a prolonged public crucifixion. Leaving the penthouse was the final act of her liberation. She moved through the vast, silent rooms, once a symbol of her fairy tale life, now a mausoleum of lies. She packed only what was truly hers: her books, her clothes, a few cherished pieces of art. The last thing she took was the Bivolgari Serpenti necklace she had seen at the gala, which Leo had quietly purchased from the auction and had sent to her. It was no longer a symbol of high society, but a reminder of a serpent shedding its skin to be reborn. Standing at the panoramic window one last time, looking down at the city that had been her kingdom and her prison, she felt no sadness, only the quiet thrill of release. Leo, meanwhile, was adrift in an ocean of responsibility. He was now on paper one of the wealthiest men in the world. He spent long, difficult days with Marcus Vance, trying to comprehend the labyrinthine structure of the empire he had inherited. His first instinct was to run to sell it all and retreat to his studio. But in conversations with Seraphina, he found a new purpose. She reminded him of the power he now wielded, the power to effect real change. He established a new independent board to run the corporate machine, and then he began the work that truly mattered to him. He liquidated many of the company's more ruthless assets and poured hundreds of millions into relaunching the Blackwood Foundation, transforming it into the world's largest private endowment for the arts and humanities. 3 weeks later, in a quiet hospital room overlooking the ocean, Seraphina gave birth to a beautiful, healthy baby boy. She held him in her arms, studying his perfect, tiny face. He had her eyes, but a determined set to his mouth that was, she had to admit, all Damien. But he would not carry that burden. She would not name him Damien Jr., a constant reminder of his father's failure, nor sterling tying him to a legacy of secrets. She named him Alexander Valerius. He would carry her name, a name of strength and resilience. He would be his own man, his own legacy. Her new life took root in a rambling, sun-bleached house on the California coast. It was a place of light and air, with large windows that opened to the sea and gardens filled with wildflowers. Here the only whispers were the rustling of leaves and the gentle murmur of the waves. It was here months later that the final healing began. She sat on a wide, shaded porch, rocking Alexander in her arms. Leo was with her, sitting on the steps, a sketchbook open on his lap. He wasn't drawing the spectacular sunset. He was capturing the way Alexander's tiny fingers curled around Seraphina's thumb. There was an easy peace between them, a deep friendship reforged in the crucible of the gala. They were two people whose lives had been irrevocably changed, bound together by a bizarre twist of fate, now building a new definition of family. Seraphina looked from her sleeping son to the vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean. The storm had passed. She had navigated the treacherous waters of deceit and betrayal, and had reached a shore she never knew she was searching for. She had lost a gilded cage and gained the entire world. Here, with her son in her arms and a true friend by her side, she was not a Blackwood or a Valerius, not a victim or a victor. She was simply, finally free. And so a story that began with a billionaire's cruel rejection ended with the quiet triumph of a woman who refused to be broken. Seraphina's journey shows us that truth is the most powerful currency of all, and that integrity is a greater inheritance than any fortune. Damien Blackwood lost everything because he valued his pride more than his family. Leo Vance gained a world he never asked for, and chose to reshape it with kindness. What do you think? Was Damien a villain or a man manipulated into betraying his own heart? Could you ever forgive him? What would you do if you were in Leo's shoes? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. This story is a powerful reminder that the most shocking dramas aren't just fiction. They echo the real-life struggles of love, lies, and the quest for justice. If this story captivated you, please hit that like button. Share it with someone who loves a story of incredible twists, and most importantly, subscribe to our channel for more tales of Jodorma resilience and shocking revelations. Thank you for watching.